My brother, Rabbi Benny Lau, was a very prominent modern Orthodox rabbi and an ally to the queer community and someone fighting for human rights and justice. He's a very brave thinker inside that complicated world. And he came out by saying, Ha'aron ze mavet, the closet is death. That was in the immediate aftermath of Sheila's killing and growing homophobia and violence. And he became an ally and a voice in the Orthodox world for families struggling with religion, law, and gay pride. And I remember there's a photo of me at the Pride in Jerusalem, walking with a poster that has his face on it that says Aaron Zemavet, closet is death. Is there any better way to depict Shomer Achi Anochi? I am my brother's keeper.
Welcome back to the Pluralist Podcast from both sides of the ocean. I am Orly Erez-Likhovski, Executive Director of the Israel Religious Action Center.
I'm Rabbi Josh Weinberg. I serve as the Vice President for Israel and Reform Zionism for the URJ and as the head of ARTSA.
And today we're going to talk about LGBTQ plus life in Israel and North America, about how so much has changed and so much remains unresolved, and how the struggle for LGBTQ plus equality connects to religion, democracy, and the future of Israeli society. Pride Month has just opened in Israel a couple of days ago, and last week's Jerusalem Pride Parade gave us powerful starting point for this conversation. Thousands of people marching through Jerusalem, including religious Orthodox Jews, rabbis, families, allies, and a lot of people wearing kippot, insisting that there is room for everyone in our Judaism, in Israel's capital, in Israel's public square. It was a really, really heartwarming and inspiring event for me. But before we turn to that, we have to acknowledge the unbelievable moment we're recording in. Just yesterday, on Monday, Iran fired rockets at Israel. And once again, we ran to the shelters, just not believing that we are back to this really unbelievable and crazy reality. It seems that for now it's not going to continue, and it was just a one-time thing, but the uncertainty is terrible. And of course, there's so many things happening in the north of Israel and in the West Bank.
First of all, it was wonderful first seeing all of the pictures of you and our entire reform movement and everybody coming out together, all wearing the T-shirts, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you should love your neighbor as yourself, with the colors of the rainbow across. And then it feels like, here we are again. Here we go. So just what does it feel like on the ground? I mean, were you embracing for a much longer conflict, or what are you feeling?
I think that the feeling was, first of all, people say we can't believe we're in this terrible situation again. And we were afraid, obviously, that it's going to be again a few weeks. And I think that just understanding that our fate is in the hands of, I'm sorry, but just two lunatics, and I'm not talking about Iran, is really hard to grasp. Thank God it stopped after one day. It could, just be sparked again every day. So I think the uncertainty definitely remains. It's very hard to sort of, plan anything in such uncertain circumstances. How did you sort of experience it from North America?
Yeah, absolutely. All of us braced. Of course, our first concern is for the safety and security of everyone there, and those who don't have mamadim, or safe rooms to go to, and that's scary. And then, quickly to think about what are the ramifications. Our flight's going to be canceled. Are we going to have to, I thought about our summer programs that are going to have to shift, and just
And
bracing
your daughter is supposed to come to Israel this summer. Exciting.
Okay, yes, exactly, own blood. And then, I found this surreal moment of thinking to myself when President Trump said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, hey, I call the shots here, after he last week had a very colorful conversation with Netanyahu. And I was like, is Trump the responsible adult here? Like, what? This is crazy. This is unbelievable. And so let's just say, I'm glad that we're back somewhat to, our typical abnormality. Nothing is, quite normal, but
Yeah. To the normal, abnormal reality. And I think that really brings us sort of directly into today's conversation, because it's clear that in moments of emergency and war and fear, questions of equality and human dignity, human rights are usually pushed aside as if they can wait until after the war, after the crisis, and we usually don't get there. But obviously, those questions can't wait. And obviously, the way a society treats vulnerable communities, especially in moments of emergency, tells us something essential about the society, about who belongs, who is protected, and who is not. And this is why this conversation about LGBTQ plus life in Israel feels so urgent right now. And today we are honored to be joined by Rabbi Amichai Lau-Lavie. Amichai was raised at the heart of Orthodox Jewish life in Israel and became a queer Jewish leader, builder, artist, and rabbi in North America. And through his life and work, we want to ask, can Judaism do more than correct the harms it has caused LGBTQ plus people? Can it become a home where LGBTQ plus people, Jews, are not only accepted, but actually are able to thrive? And what does this mean in Israel today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, welcome, Amichai. Great to have you.
Hello, friends. Hi, Orly. Hi, Josh. Lovely to see you both in Israel and New York. I am currently in New York for about a month, having spent the last 4 months in Jerusalem and going to go back there again in August. So I feel the
Wonderful.
split and the here, there, not just in my jet lag, but also in the way my heart tugs both ways. And I'm very grateful to be invited to be in this conversation with you both. This is a huge topic in the middle of a very difficult and heartbreaking time.
Amichai, of course, you're someone who I've known for many, many years and consider both a friend and a teacher and a colleague. And I just want to give our listeners a sense of who you are in your own biography, that Amichai, you are an Israeli-born social activist, storyteller, writer, teacher, spiritual entrepreneur, and rabbi. You're the co-founding spiritual leader of Shul in New York City, the creator of storytelling, and a leader, of course, now as the co-chair for Rabbis for Human Rights in Israel. Amichai grew up in one of Israel's most prominent rabbinic families and diplomatic families, may I add, right? You moved to New York in 1997 and 2016. After receiving rabbinic ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary, you became the 39th generation of rabbis in your family and the first to be openly queer. The remarkable journey of Amichai Lau-Lavie is at the center of Sabbath Queen, Sandy Dubowski's award-winning documentary filmed over 21 years, which follows Amichai through Orthodox inheritance, drag performance, queer fatherhood, rabbinic ordination, and the creation of new Jewish spiritual communities. And of course, your journey is taking you back and forth from Israel to New York, as you just explained to us. For this conversation about LGBTQ life in Israel, Judaism, family, belonging, and democracy, Amichai brings a deeply personal and deeply Jewish lens. Your story is not only about leaving tradition or challenging tradition, it's really about rebuilding Jewish life into something more honest, more courageous, and more alive. So we're really excited to have this conversation with you. And Orly, why don't you begin?
Yeah, it's really great to have you here. And I want to begin with what we mentioned at the beginning, which is last week's Jerusalem Pride Parade, and ask you grew up in an Israel, in a deeply religious world, and you have now spent many years building a vibrant and unique Jewish life in North America. And I want to ask you, when you see this thousands of people marching through the streets of Jerusalem, and it was, right next to the Supreme Court and the Knesset, what does that image mean to you? How do you feel when you see that? And what does it reveal about LGBTQ plus life and rights in Israel today? And could you have imagined that, seeing those events and so many people marching when you grew up or before you left Israel to the States?
Yeah, thank you. No, of course not. I don't think any of us could have imagined. And yet, some of us obviously did, because here we are. So it's an honor to sit on the shoulders of those who came before us, all the activists and all the dreamers and the visionaries. And I think it's important to mention that the fight for human rights, the fight for queer dignity and democracy for all of us is not isolated from the entire arc that we are part of on the fight and the struggle for human rights and dignity. And I feel that the LGBT struggle, here we are in Pride Month, is sitting on the shoulders of the feminists, who's sitting on the shoulders of the abolitionists, sitting on the shoulders of all the people who are seeing the divine in other people's faces and refuse to give up on the slogan, sometimes the cliche, that none of us are free until we're all free, attributed to way too many people. So I feel, first of all, this part of this conversation, for sure, with you two, Orly, we last hung out in Jerusalem just a few weeks ago when we marched in the Interfaith March for Justice and Human Rights in Jerusalem. And Josh, the many, many things we've done together, marched, worked, protested, and prayed together. So we know that we're talking about a bigger context here. And to know that in 2026, people can march in Jerusalem with heavy police security, unfortunately, and yet, yes, with heavy police security, with no incidents other than a few very minor attacks, verbal attacks, and to see the variety of expression on the spectrum of the rainbow, including Jewish observance. One of the most cited memes was Mincha at the march, like all these Orthodox and I guess conservative queer Jews stopping on the side to pray, right? Wow.
Which you might add, that may be slightly different at the Pride Parade in Tel Aviv, right? Should we?
No, 100%. The Jerusalem Pride is super important because of that. I wasn't there this year. I've been in many of them. And I will just say, I was so moved that 11 years ago, after Sheila Banki was tragically stabbed to death during Jerusalem Pride by people associated with some people who are currently in government, from the far right extremist supremacist voices in Judaism and in Israeli society. After Sheila's brutal killing, the following year was really dedicated to stepping in her memory and saying no to any kind of hatred and violence. And I composed a prayer at Tfilat HaDerech, a prayer for the safe journey that I read out loud at that journey.
And we read also this year.
Exactly, and
Every year.
people keep reading it, and I wasn't there, but people send me the videos,
Yeah.
and it's so meaningful on a very personal level, but also knowing that, yes, people are praying at this journey. It is a way to be religiously active in the name of love and to expand the sense of we. And I know that people were marching this year and in previous years who would not have marched before. The religious parents of people who came out, the rabbis, obviously political leaders. We have a long way to go for human freedom and for queer pride in its full expression. And step by step, this march is one of the ways we are forging a new reality.
Yeah, I don't know if we can say that Ishai Schlissel, who was the murderer of Shira Banki, and 10 years before actually stabbed people who marched at the Pride Parade in 2005. I don't know if it was actually, his association to people who are now in government was established. I don't know it, but we should mention that the incitement against the LGBTQ plus community and the fact that we have now the most homophobic government that we have ever had just made all the event all the more important, right? The fact that it actually now is obvious, despite everything that is happening in the halls of government, that there is a pride parade in Jerusalem and nobody questions it anymore is amazing. And by the way, I just saw that a recent poll showed that 74% of Israelis support LGBTQ equality. And that's like a huge number in today's Israel. And I think we have to remember that you mentioned the feminist, struggle. And I think when we're talking about both women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights, we see a huge way that we've progressed despite so many terrible things, because I think a lot of people got to know queer people around them. And when you know those people, it's very hard for you to treat them as the other or to have a lot of prejudice against them. So we have a lot still to go. And there is a lot of discrimination and violence targeted at members of the community. But I think we've come a very long way. And Rabbi Noah Satat, who is now the Director General of ACRI, of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, and was the director of Iraq, actually gave a speech right next to the Knesset. And she says, I remember the march 20 years ago when we were not allowed to march in Jerusalem because it was too dangerous, and we were supposed, we held just an event at a closed stadium, and look how far we've come. And I think especially now when we need so much consolation and some kind of hope, I think we have to remember this, good side as well. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
just as a sidebar, ironically, sadly, tragically, while the numbers in Israel might be going up on the recognition of pride, and perhaps even same-sex marriage, according to some polls, in the U.S. they're going down, according to recent polls, because of the
Interesting.
political climate and the conservatism, etc. So I think it's important to remember with humility that the pendulum does
Sure.
what pendulums do, and we're in the middle of a paradigm shift, socially, politically, for so many different reasons. This is an absolute moment to celebrate and to understand again the ecosystem of human rights within which we're operating. And I'm sure we'll get to it, but we need to also be careful where we celebrate the rights of one community while completely looking away from the rights of others. And the both and, I feel, is so much the work we are all doing to really be careful about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a critically important point. And, when we see one society versus another and comparing and contrast, especially, we both purport ourselves to be open, modern Western societies that recognize the rights and dignity of all people. And yet, but Amichai, can you take us just a step back a little bit? And I want to just hear about you for a second, and just tell us a little bit about your own upbringing. What was Jewish life like for you? What did it mean to come from such, like a prominent rabbinic, I would add the word Orthodox, family, and what what were some of the life lessons that you learned, growing up? And then we'll start to talk about, where your own path took you.
Yeah, and just before you answer, I want to share, Amichai, a personal note that actually connects us. That I don't think you know that your family came originally from the same little town in Poland that my grandparents came, which is Piotrków Trybunalski. And that's, something that connects us, which is very moving for me.
Holy mas, not a small town, Piotrków Trybunalski, a
Yes,
little
right.
landsman pride. Hello. It's a big city. Was the city of the tribunal of
It
Poland.
was a
Oh,
big
was
city,
okay.
right, right,
Okay, we got to talk about that. That's
for
good.
sure.
That's mishpucha stuff. And so I want to say that I'm very proud of my family, my immediate family, my late father Naftali, whose father Moshe Chaim Lau was indeed the last chief rabbi of Piotrków, who tragically perished in Treblinka with his son and many of the community. My grandmother, his wife Chaya, was from Krakow, from a very illustrious Hasidic family, and then my father, who survived Buchenwald and built Israel, and made sure that his younger brother survived, who later would become the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Amichai Lau. So that's sort of my father's side, and then my mother's side is a very German, British, Orthodox family. So I grew up with this legacy of Holocaust survival, this mix of Eastern and Western European Jewry that wouldn't have been possible before World War II and afterwards. My mother made Aliyah from England in 1951 as a young Zionist social worker wanting to help build the new country. And I'm the youngest of four, and we grew up right on the border between Ramat Gan and Bnei Brak, which is both geographically and ideologically just between the very ultra-Orthodox and the more modern secular and modern Orthodox. So I really think I grew up on this hyphen in many ways, and that was the product of our culture, religious Zionist, very modern. I can trace in my own life, I'm now 57, how we inched towards the center and towards the center right. I was actually in Sebastia, the first settlement in 1977, I believe, as a little kid for the first wedding that happened there. That anyway, that's a long story. I'm like, wow, okay. But then I would say just to make this quick, by the time I'm 13 years old, we're in New York City. My father became the consul general of Israel in New York, and so we uprooted uptown to Manhattan to the Upper East Side. And my bar mitzvah was at a very Orthodox synagogue on the Upper East Side. I'm standing on the bima. I'm chanting my entire lengthy Torah portion, Achrei Mot Kedoshim, and I'm chanting the verse about abomination, that two men cannot have sex. It will be an execution. And I remember reading it and thinking, bleep, F, what? Now what? How am I going to deal with this? At 13, I sort of had an inkling of where this was going. And it will take me many, many years to go back to that moment and reclaim that moment and give that 13-year-old terrified boy a hug and say, "Yeah, beseder, it's gonna be okay, you're gonna figure it out." It took me many years to come out to my family, to get the immediate embrace, not with ease and not immediately, of my parents, of my siblings, and frankly, my larger, more orthodox, ultra-Orthodox and very right-wing family has not really embraced me. So there's blessings and there is silence simultaneously. And, uh, and I'm gonna fast forward many, many years, actually. You talked about the Jerusalem Pride. I think, I don't remember if it was before or after Sheila, probably after. My brother Benny Lau, who many of you know, Rabbi Benny Lau, was a very prominent modern Orthodox rabbi and an ally to the queer community and someone fighting for human rights and justice.
Would you say he's on the more liberal end of orthodoxy in terms of?
I would say
Yeah.
absolutely. He's a very brave thinker inside that complicated world. And he came out by saying, "Haron ze mavet," the closet is death. That was in the immediate aftermath of Sheila's
Wow.
killing and the growing homophobia and violence. And he became an ally and a voice in the Orthodox world for families struggling with religion, law, and gay pride. And I remember there's a photo of me at the Pride in Jerusalem, walking with a poster that has his face on it that says "Aron ze mavet," closet is death.
Wow. Wow.
And I thought, you know, is there any better way to depict Shomer Achi Anochi? I am my brother's keeper.
Wow. It's amazing.
So, so I
Yeah, Tartei Lashon, yeah.
literally. And so many, many years later, I think my family of origin is a role model. And Sabbath Queen, the film that you mentioned, Josh, that just celebrated 2 years since its premiere and it's touring all over the world. It just filmed this past Sunday at the Westchester Reformed Temple as part of
Mm.
their Pride Shabbat. This little pin that I'm wearing, if you can see,
Mhm.
Super Gay Jew, I got from WRT. The film is about many things, but it does talk about my mother, my late father, my brother, as role models of people who are not willing to give up on their loved ones and also maintain Jewish tradition in ways
Yeah.
and figuring out the both and. So I'll
Yeah.
say that's where I come from. And I forged my own path and did a lot of crazy things, and
Well,
most of
let's
them I'm
let's
proud
talk
of.
about that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
no, but before that, Josh, I actually have two small questions for you. First of all, did you have an option not to become a rabbi in a family of rabbis? And the second is, since you were going back and forth from Israel to the US and back, even growing up, where did you feel like that it was sort of more welcoming for you as a queer person?
So interesting. So look, I really feel like I belong to a generation that saw and created the shift in many ways. Just coming out of the AIDS crisis, just coming into more recognition in the world of same sex, not as a complete taboo and shonda, and beginning to be part of the shift in legal, conceptual acceptance. And so I feel lucky this way and privileged, and there's a responsibility that comes with this privilege, not just to keep working for LGBTQ plus rights, but again, for more human rights. And I left Israel in 97, partially because as somebody who grew up Orthodox and was no longer interested in Orthodoxy, the understanding of where Jewish law had a dead end when it came to accepting me as a gay man opened the door for me to understand that there were many options to orthodoxy as far as women's rights and as far as creativity around how we handle others and as far as just the flexibility of Jewish law and its evolution. And so I was curious about the rabbinate. I chose to do Jewish education through culture and storytelling. Josh and I met a billion years ago while we were both in informal Jewish education, and that led me to the States in 1997 to work at a congregation of B'nai Jeshurun under the wonderful Rabbi Rolly Matalon, who invited me to sort of to teach there and to create Jewish culture and to open my eyes to the many ways of being Jewish in the world, including queer, that was not as expressive in Israel in those years as it would become shortly after. So I am grateful for what I experienced here and the many forms of creative expressions, including queer expressions, from attending CBST and being at an all-out queer synagogue and meeting its leaders, to seeing all the wonderful and weird ways in which people combined identities. And then because I kept going back to Israel and I'm still so involved there, and now much more so, I was able to both be part of creating and witnessing the ways in which Israelis are taking Judaism and also queer Judaism to a unique other place, with the language, with a nuance, with a no-nonsense approach, and with a chutzpah that really opens up new doors to the challenges we have in Israel and to the opportunities. It's a both-and situation. There's a lot of beautiful overlap. Obviously, the political situation is creating some challenges for how we embrace both being queer and Jewish, Israeli and on the LGBT map, and maybe we'll talk about that. And look, we can talk a lot about pride, and we got to talk about prejudice. There's a lot of joy, and we're at a moment of pain.
There we have our title.
Yeah.
Pride and Prejudice is the Holy Land.
I was
Great.
thinking that, yeah, absolutely.
Just as long as you give Jane Austen some credit.
Of course.
Yes. And just so two things. First, say a word about what that means to be this kind of inclusive Judaism and how that might have impacted back to Israel, right? We usually see Israel sort of the traditional center, Achad Ha'am, as the spiritual center that breaks out, that sends out to the far-flung diaspora communities. But I want to think about it as the reverse. Like, how is what you've created, both with storytelling first, and then with Shul, and how has that impacted Israel at all, and or Israelis, or the liberal, progressive Jewish movements in Israel, and then also, where are you still feeling some of that prejudice? Two separate questions. We can.
Yeah, for sure. So, first of all, I think we all know, and the amazing work that Iraq and all you guys are doing, and the reform movement is doing, the liberal movements are doing in Israel, is move the needle on what does a Judaism look like when it is not tethered to the traumas of the past, when it isn't located inside one box, which is for the most part the Orthodox box, but is on a much more polydox, flexidox spectrum of expression. Now, because for political reasons, Israel went with no separation of religion and state, and the official religion per the 1940s, 50s, 60s is Orthodoxy, because of the rabbinate, because of the legislation, etc., so many Israelis who are not Orthodox, or grew up Orthodox and left Orthodoxy, are stuck without really seeing the validity of the other options. And the reform movement, the conservative movement, the reconstructionist movement, Jewish renewal, all came to Israel with a heavy American accent. So for many Israelis, reforming becomes a slur for not authentic Judaism. That is awful and destructive and wrong, and is slowly shifting as more and more Israelis are embracing the fact, especially now, I would say in the aftermath of October 7th, in the moral crisis that we're living through, people are looking for spiritual responses for how to be Jewish, Israeli, ethical, moral, helpful, healing, and connect to something bigger than a national identity. So there is a seeking for religiosity.
It's fascinating because, I was talking about this exact question with many of our teachers, Rabbi Michael Marmer, and, he reminded me that all of Judaism in Israel is imported. Whether it comes with an Ashkenazi accent, with the Iraqi, Yemenite, Moroccan accent, it is all imported. So why is one less authentic than the other? Sort of the Temani, grandfather with peyot and a beard is very, very authentic, whereas, our Rabbi Levi Wyman Kelman with his American accent, it seemed somehow less. I don't know
Yeah,
why that.
yeah, Josh, I think it's like the sketch from Lul, from the mythologic,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
those are the
Look,
What you're saying, Amichai, is definitely backed by survey results that more and more Israelis are actually feeling empathy toward Reform Judaism. And I think especially under this government, they're looking for something else. So Judaism
and
that
so
they can relate to and that is aligned with their liberal values because they want to
right.
push away what the government is presenting as, the Judaism of hatred and exclusion and intolerance.
So we're seeing something changing here in the mindset of what people see and where does humanity see, like a humanitarian seeing of others. And I will say it begins with seeing that gay people have rights to be part of society. And ideally, it goes all the way to recognizing the rights of Palestinians to have their own freedom and rights and dignity, and to just not to dehumanize each other. And I want to say sort of something about that. I'm in many, many conversations with Israelis, with Palestinians, with Jews across the spectrum in the peacemaking world and in the attempt to create dialogue when we're so divided right now and there's so much polarization within the Jewish community in the United States, with Israel, Europe, etc. My opening card is my gay identity. There's a way to say to people on the Orthodox, ultra Orthodox, extreme Muslim, secular, anti, whatever, saying, look, here I am. I was created this way. I didn't choose to be created this way. I chose not to hide. I chose not to live a life of loneliness inside the closet. Like many others, I belong to a paradigm of people who are claiming our humanity and our rights without compromising or challenging yours. And there is a trend towards that. Thank goodness we're at this moment. That is allowing me to rethink Judaism, to rethink Jewish law, to understand that we keep evolving, that it's on us to keep expanding our empathy towards others, to understand our own blind spots, our own historical limitations, and to keep growing where women have rights, where queer people have rights, where people have rights. That's all relatively new in our human evolution. Just like I am fighting as an openly gay man, an openly gay rabbi, for my place at the table with no shame and with no blame, it is our responsibility to keep doing so for other people. Let's see the humanity of other people and let's let our biases, our fear driven hatred take a breath.
Your queer identity actually opens up people or gets people to sort of embrace you more. And I think it goes back to what we said about the shifting attitudes toward queer people, right? So the progress we've made, I think it's really fascinating.
And it's a double-edged sword. But I will say, like I had this conversation last week with a group of Israelis who were visiting New York and met with me. They're all from Otef Aza. They've all been through October 7th. They're in civic roles, and they're there to meet American Jewry. And some of them were very right-wing, Bibi and right words. And we're furious that I belong to a group of rabbis who has met with Zoran Mamdani. And Zoran Mamdani was a visitor at my synagogue on Yom Kippur per his request. I'm a bridge builder and I'm a dialogue creator, and I meet people in the messy middle. Not all of them, and not always, but as often as possible. And I got such rage from a few of those people in the group. How dare you talk to an anti Semite who's an anti Zionist? And I said, look, I'm sitting with Orthodox people and with Haredi people and with Palestinian people to try and build dialogue. And I open with with my monologue, with my story. Can you see my humanity? I'm trying to see yours. Let's just
Mhm.
start there before we demonize people. And not always, but in this case, this really rageful guy kind of chilled out a little bit. So in some weird ways, not all, I think we need to take the ways we are standing up for human rights, and in this case, gay rights, and push it forward towards human rights. The
Mhm.
shadow side of that, I'm going to drop another P word here, is pinkwashing, where
I
when
was going to
Amir
ask you about that.
Ohana, when Amir Ohana, the Speaker of the Knesset, with whom I do not agree, politically on many, many issues. The
Today is
stance he
Tuesday.
has taken to limit Israeli democracy and free expression and peacemaking. And I'm not going to, I don't want to implicate you in my political or your political position.
No, no.
Let me just say, I'm not a
Everything
huge
is
fan
true.
of
Everything you're
I'm
saying
not
is
a huge
true.
fan of Amir Ohana and this
Yeah.
particular government. Amir Ohana walked down Fifth Avenue 2 weeks ago in the Salute to Israel parade with a delegation of Israeli ministers, including Smotrich. And I read your post about it, Josh, and that wasn't planned ahead of time. And so a lot of Jewish leaders in the U.S. were implicated by walking down with Smotrich down the line. Now, on the other hand, there is Amir Ohana. See, Israel is embracing its first openly gay a member, head of the Knesset. So it's a both and situation. Yes, there is an openly gay uh, leader in the Knesset. And the day Ohana was sworn in, when this government was sworn in, I was protesting in front of the Knesset because it
Mm.
was the government that brought in Ben Gvir. And we already knew that's not going to be good because a racist Kahanist in the Israeli government, thanks to Bibi, is not going to be good news. We didn't know how bad. Was protesting that government with a lot of queer flags and LGBT signage outside the Knesset. And an hour later, I'm hearing Ohana's speech where he's thanking his partner and is blessing Sheikh Hayano. And I'm sobbing
Yeah.
because here's a gay man on the Knesset thanking his husband with a bracha. And this is the man I just protested.
And by the way, he, of course, completely ignored the fact that all his rights and the rights of his partner are the direct result of Supreme Court decisions that he's trying to weaken and dismantle and destroy. And by the way, we just had, one of our latest victories is really granting equal adoption rights to gay couples, and this was because of a Supreme Court decision that accepted our petition, and they
That he's
completely,
fighting.
ignored it. Yeah, sure.
So it's complicated, and all
Yeah.
I'm saying is there's a both and situation here where being very binary and very polarization, and he's bad, period, and I'm righteous, period. No. If rainbow teaches us anything, is that the colors blend into each other, and life is not black and white, and meeting in the messy middle for gay rights, for human rights, for Palestinian rights, for women's rights, for all rights is messy. It's a messy human struggle, and it takes stamina and patience and compassion and our eyes on the prize. And the prize is the democracy we want to live in, both in the US and in Israel. And right now it's under attack, which is why we can't give up.
And can I ask about the flip side of this all, in that oftentimes we have seen, especially in the last couple of years, in the LGBTQ plus community and in many progressive circles, it is very hard to be Israeli or a Zionist. How has October 7th impacted your life and your work? And how has it been for you showing up in those spaces? I mean, your name is Amichai Lau-Lavie. Anyone who Googles you knows your story and, like, figures out where you come from. And how have you navigated that? I mean, we've had some really difficult conversations about that over the past few years. And let me just add one more thing, is that I think it was October 10th, I want to say, where you and I together held space for a very large group of Israelis in Brooklyn coming to just emote and to seek solace and to, be guided and seek, actually, not from a psychologist or a social worker, but from rabbis to help them really through this just unbelievably traumatic experience. How is all that playing in for you with the events of the past couple of years?
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. That's a hard
Uh,
question and it's a sad story. So the
sure.
fact of the matter is, like others in the Jewish world, in the Jewish queer world, I've retreated. And by retreated, I don't mean step back from my affiliations, but found safer spaces and more contained containers to keep doing the work. And while I am an advocate for nuance and for dialogue and for bridge building, there are times in which to say, I want to be around the table with the people with whom I don't have to constantly explain myself. right? I want some familiarity. And a lot of us, not just in the queer world, are seeking those spaces. The surge is about finding a way to be with my people, but not say my people are the only people, right? There's something to say family first, but not family only. And so I'm seeing that in many ways. I'll give you just a couple of examples. I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times 2 years ago for Pride, saying why I won't march in gay pride this year, not on Fifth Avenue with a main
In
parade
New York, right? Yeah,
in New York, and nor with the alternative, which I helped create during the early Trump years, which became completely left, and where there would probably be way more keffiyehs alongside rainbow flags, and wearing even this pin with the Star of David and the rainbow colors would be frowned upon, if not attacked.
dangerous.
But it's very likely because it's happened, right? The lines are very split. The queer world is very, very left and very pro-Palestinian and very anti-Zionist. The nuance of what does it mean to be against this government and against the kind of religious Zionism that is fascist and racist, but not against the idea that Zionism needs to reimagine itself as a place that takes care of all humans between the river and the sea, where Israelis and Palestinians have rights and the determination requirement to live as free people. We have a lot of work to do. People don't get that. They see the slogans, they see what they see on the screens. It's yay, nay, pro, anti, and it's hostile. So I've stepped away, and that op-ed that I wrote was about on Pride. Maybe being in the streets is not the best thing for everybody right now. Host a Shabbat dinner,
Mm.
have a picnic, have other ways of being with like-minded people to keep pushing for pride and pushing for acceptance and for our rights, and maybe not all of us together under the same banner. It was very much appreciated by some, attacked by others, but I know this coming Pride, New York, I won't be here actually. I made a choice not to be here. I'm going to be in Mexico City screening Sabbath Queen, hosting a Friday night event for the LGBTQ community, the Jewish LGBT community in Mexico. And on Saturday, they're having their march, and they told me how worried they are about marching because Mexico City is also very, very pro-Palestinian. And while many there are in the peace camp, as I am, it doesn't feel safe. So we're creating an alternative Shabbat experience for those who want, and then some will march and some won't. So I think there's creativity here. I'll share one more really painful moment that I mentioned in that op-ed. Shortly after the event that you're just talking about, Josh, I think it was November or December, or already after the beginning of the incursion into Gaza, etc., and the terrible losses began to be, to break so many of us. I passed by Union Square, a protest to end the war and like as we've been there every week to bring back the hostages and to stop the war and to fight for ceasefire and human rights. This was a little different. It was very pro-Palestine, and I don't know if pro-Hamas, but definitely not pro-Israel in any way. And there's a bunch of protesters with rainbow flags and keffiyehs who started shouting, "Kill the Jews! Kill the Jews!" Union Square, New York City. This was not about Israel. This was anti-Semitism for sure. And some people tried to stop them, and they were. It became an ugly brawl. And I was like, I'm out of here. I don't feel safe. I don't want to be seen by anyone's camera in the proximity of this protest. I'm heartbroken. I knew some of those people with the rainbow flags around them. They were from my wider queer community. So that was and is a warning sign that we're living in a moment of great divisions where we need to figure out how we still find common ground and work with those who are willing to look beyond their either or to find some both. And it's not everybody, and it's not everywhere, and it's not all the time. It's definitely not in the main streets. It's more in the back rooms, not out of shame, but out of the wisdom, blessing. The Talmud says, "En bracha ela b'samui min ha'ayin." Sometimes blessing happens underground, and that's where the flowers are flourishing from. So there's a lot of work right now to build bridges, to fix, to repair relationships, to plan ahead. And I will say that's also it's also what's happening in Israel, where the queer community is trying to figure out how to get beyond right and left. There are a lot of people who turn to the right, but people are trying to figure out how to be open for everybody. There are some movements that I'm part of where Palestinian Israelis and in the West Bank who are openly gay or trying to be openly gay are forging relationships with Israeli in the LGBTQ community so that there's a safety and there's a togetherness there. That's not easy, but that's happening. So it's that taking the queer struggles and triumphs to the next level is what I think is going to make sure that we don't squander this opportunity of collective liberation, but push it forward.
Yeah, and we should mention, by the way, mentioning the Palestinian queer community in Israel, that while many people in Israel within the queer community have made an amazing progress, including Orthodox Jews, not ultra Orthodox, but Orthodox Jews. I think when we talk about Palestinian members of the LGBTQ community, it's still very much, very, very much problematic, and that's something we should definitely keep on working. But I think we sort of skipped part that I wanted to talk about, which is tell us a little bit about, some of your projects in New York City and how you really are embracing Judaism into a very, very original and creative way, whether it's, lab shul or storytelling. Maybe just give us, a couple of minutes about that. I think it's super interesting to hear some of your
Pleasure.
projects.
Yeah, because really we're in the same spectrum of creative Jewish life. Briefly, I'll say when I came to New York in the late 90s, I created a theater company called Storytelling, which is about Torah and storytelling and revives the ancient tradition where every time we read the Torah aloud, we don't just chant the Hebrew, we add the vernacular adaptation, translation, interpretation that honors the old narrative we inherited and talks back to the text. So translation becomes a vehicle for updating the version. And sometimes we take Torah texts that are toxic and trauma inducing and problematic, from misogyny to homophobia to racism, etc. That's part of what we inherited and includes skeletons in our holy ark. And yet, rather than hide it, we tell it and we talk back to it and we invite the community to engage in how we reimagine our narratives. So storytelling began as a theater company. Josh Weinberg wasn't a rabbi yet, and he was trained. Rabbi Oded Mazor in Kol Neshama in Yerushalayim was trained. Like, it's going to have a renaissance again in Israel soon. The storytelling theater company, after a decade, morphed into the Lab Shul community. We'd figured out we're not just a theater company that does ritual, we're a congregation that does theater. So Lab Shul is now celebrating its B mitzvah from our incorporation. It's a thriving pop-up community in New York City. Our tagline is God optional, because so many people are allergic to the old God and through religiosity. So we're inviting them into spirituality on their own terms. We're everybody friendly, Jewish, Jew-adjacent. Part of my work has been in coming up with new ways of officiating intermarriage unions between people who were born Jewish and people who are not on the spectrum of Jewish identity. So that is a big deal and a big part of our community. Artist driven, everything from the music to the artistry to the conceptual and spatial design is created by artists. And I will say also, again, in the theme of what we're talking about in the last few years, between Zionists and anti-Zionists, between different ways of being Jewish in the world, we've maintained a space where people come to have courageous conversations and to not cancel each other out. And as much as we can, to offer spaces for listening. So the creativity of taking age-old Judaism and making it relevant for today is thriving here. And one of the things I'm very interested in is doing more of that back home in Israel, where, as we said, there is so much going on already with creative religious expression. And I think some of the projects from Lab Shul and storytelling will do really well in Israeli soil. I'll mention just one. Our flagship project at the moment is called Becoming, and it's about reimagining rites of passage, coming of age at every life stage. So we completely reimagined the teen B mitzvah for these young people to become storytellers, and whether they chant Torah or not, as I did at my bar mitzvah painfully, they're invited to be storytellers and become these storytellers. And then we've started doing this with our parents and grandparents. And so now we have projects for 40s, 50s. How do I take midlife and take a project which is not just about being a bar bat mitzvah, but becoming a human being at another phase of life, inspired by Jewish storytelling and by my own tradition. And we're doing it for people who are 65 plus. Basically, how do I not just become an older person? How do I become an elder? Using the same storytelling methodology. So these rites of passage is something we're focusing on here in New York and online, and we're beginning to do it in Israel as well. There's no such thing. And Orly, want to hear more from you about it, from the work you're doing. But I think using these life cycle moments as a way to reimagine spirituality, social activism, and community building is a win-win-win that more of us are ready for right now.
Yeah, sounds amazing. And I wanted to ask, we're nearing the end of the session, but I wanted to ask whether within your work that you just described, you feel difference under the current Trump administration. I mean, we mentioned at the beginning the problematic relationship toward the queer community these days. Whatever is coming from the halls of government, but in general from the American public. So maybe just say a couple of words about the status of the queer community now in the United States.
Yeah, I will. I will just say I congratulate all of us for going beyond cliches and doing this entire talk without mentioning the fact that I had a very illustrious career as a drag queen, and Rabbi Hadassah Gross, who's the star
Hey,
of the movie Sabbath Queen,
wanted
and
to
who opened
We
many.
want, we want to, but you have so many
no,
things that you've done.
With Hadassah Gross, may she live forever and may her memory be a blessing, because she's not dead or alive. She's in the Dead Sea forever.
Amen.
um, um, Opened for me the way to be both very queer publicly and very Jewish publicly. And it didn't happen, but she was invited to the White House under Biden for Pride Month. And I couldn't come for a bunch of reasons, and I actually didn't want to. But here we are in 2026. I am the proud bio dad, the gay father of 3 children in a very queer family. There are more of us throughout the spectrum of leadership who are out and proud in the US, in Israel, in Europe, elsewhere. There are heads of state who are openly gay, and the White House is not going to be marking Pride in the US at this moment. And the polls are showing that, shifting perspectives. So on the one hand, it's heartbreaking. On the other hand, the perspective of having lived along these few couple decades now in my 50s is that things shift. Shift happens. And Trump, may that legacy not be ours for long. May we fight for all the ways of justice and see a shift there, here, everywhere. Grateful for where to be grateful for, and there's things Trump is doing that is making life better for some people, despite my deep disregard for his ideology and behavior. And so we need to know where to say yes and where to say no. I believe pride will persist. The human dignity and the human will to love despite hate is larger than life. And if we're thinking about where we've been and where people have hated and killed each other and are now working together, Israel and Germany, just as one example, and where places where people were incarcerated for being gay, for being Jewish, for being other, who are now heads of state, we know that things shift. And Judaism, thousands of years old, is teaching us that we not only can, but we must evolve. And so my eyes are on the prize of the evolving story. And I think it's conversations like these, leaders like you, organizations like the ones we're working with, whether it's the Reform Movement, Iraq, Rabbis for Human Rights, that is pushing the agenda and moving the needle. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it's definitely happening.
Amen. And Amichai, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for everything you're doing and for being the inspiring, creative Jewish leader who has really one foot in the political activism and another foot in what I like, that we called spiritual entrepreneurship. And so and 1 foot in New York and 1 foot in Jerusalem, as we say, Bavel Yerushalayim, going back and forth. That's a lot of feet.
And at least
Yeah.
1 foot with high heels in the dead.
Yes, yes.
You did
Got it.
both, so you'll back up.
I'm also wearing my quirky paw, by the way.
So, and 1 foot always marching forward. And so really thank you so much for being part of this conversation and for inspiring so many of our listeners.
Thank you, Michai. I think you really ended with this amazing. Usually our final question is what makes you hopeful, but you actually answered it before we even asked. So it's really wonderful. And I have to say that when I, was in the Pride Parade last week, it was really such a hopeful event. And I looked around and I say, this is what Jerusalem should be like. This is what Israel should be like, just filled with love, welcoming everyone. And I definitely agree with you that we are on the path forward. We have so much to do. We've achieved so much, but of course, we're going to continue until we get to full equality for everyone. So thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. And I want to say to our listeners that conversations like this are exactly why we started this podcast. This podcast exists because we believe Israel can be better for all who live here and for all who care about it from afar. But that takes honest conversation and it takes partnership. So if these conversations are important to you, please share this episode and help us keep this conversation going.
To stay up to date, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to help us grow, make an engaging post on social media, leave a 5-star review, maybe something along the lines of, even if I don't necessarily identify as part of the LGBTQ community, I might think about adopting an identity just to use that as a gateway into conversations about human rights and civil rights. For instance, you could use something like that and send this episode to someone who should be part of this conversation. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Bye bye.